We do know that President Trump is threatening, quote, very severe tariffs on Russia if the war with Ukraine isn't, quote, resolved in 50 days. The president spoke from the Oval Office alongside NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte during the NATO chief's visit to Washington. Trump suggesting that he could impose 100% tariffs, but it was not clear right away what products would actually be targeted here. I do want to talk a little bit more about tariffs in general, so let's bring in Peter Navarro, the White House Senior Counselor for Trade and Manufacturing. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Nice to be with you, sir.
All right. And first off, I do want to ask you about the situation here regarding President Trump's announcement, so to speak, earlier regarding what could happen if the war is not to end in 50 days. What impact could those tariffs actually have on Russia and their trading partners? But also, do we know what products would be included?
Well, let's talk about the impact broadly. In order for Russia to prosecute the war it's prosecuting at the intense level it is, it needs a tremendous amount of money. And right now, it's getting a lot of that money from the sale of its oil and natural gas. And if you tariff that and you put on what's called secondary sanctions, which would penalize China, India, and other countries for buying Russian oil, that would have a tremendous impact on the Russian economy and on Russia's ability to wage war. So that's the underlying strategy here. And what we've seen in the past is that sanctions alone are a very useful and important tool, and they are an effective tool. But when you combine the power of financial sanctions, which is to say to cut off, say, Russia's access to the financial system, if you combine that with tariffs, it's a very potent weapon. The problem we've had with sanctions is that there's workarounds and runarounds that Russia has been able to do. So this is a complete package. The mission of President Trump, let's be clear, there are millions of people that have died from this war. It's the loss of life in this war is unimaginable to the American mind. If you compare, for example, the roughly 60,000 soldiers we unfortunately lost in the Vietnam War, which was a multi-year war, it was many years, with what's happened with Russia alone, it's at least 1 million soldiers, and Ukraine probably another 500,000. I mean, it's just unbelievable bloodshed. It's just got to stop. The president has tried to do everything so far he can to bring the parties to the table. This is the next step in his strategy, and he's giving Russia some time to think about what to do and how to respond, not just putting the hammer down, but this is the way he negotiates. So as the boss likes to say, let's see what happens. But peace in Ukraine would be a tremendous boon, both to the world in terms of just the people dying, but also in terms of the economy and stability in the region.
What about the European Union and, of course, Mexico? Because we heard about President Trump on Saturday making that announcement on Truth Social about the tariffs there. What impact is he hoping that those are going to have?
Well, let's talk about Europe first. I mean, Navarro's rule here is that every country cheats us in a different way, depending on how they're organized, their industrial policy. India, for example, is the Maharaja of tariffs, has the highest tariffs in the world, whereas Japan has very high non-tariff barriers to keep, for example, our automobiles out. If you look at Europe, Europe has tariffs, for example, that are 4 times higher on our autos than theirs. As a result, our auto deficit with Europe is very, very significant. What's fair about that? But on top of that, they also have this thing called a value-added tax, and the way that's treated makes it effectively both an export subsidy to their exports, but also an additional tariff. So the effective tariff, for example, on autos is 30% on American exports to Europe, whereas it's only 2.5% on German and French exports to us. So those are the kinds of things that got to be settled. In Europe, by the way, I mean, we've tried to play fair with Europe. We went to the World Trade Organization. We've won cases on things like pork and beef. And Europe just flat out refuses to abide by the results. So the President Trump, we know that their deficit is, I think, the second highest behind China. And it's stealing our jobs, it's stealing our factories, it's stealing our wealth and our assets. President Trump, if Europe doesn't settle with us in a good deal, then he is imposing unilaterally a good deal for them. And what we have to be careful, and I would simply suggest to Europeans that the idea of retaliating against the United States when you're cheating the hell out of us, not a good idea. That's not fair. I think you guys over there in Europe have to go to the mountaintop, look at what you're doing to us, understand that it's not a level playing field, that we have a president who will not tolerate that, and that we have to come to an accommodation which is fair to American workers and American business.
There's been a lot of criticism since President Trump did announce these tariffs. I mean, we go back months and months here. So what do you say to Americans and just folks out there who say that these tariffs are really placing a tax on American consumers? What would you say to them?
Well, first of all, tariffs aren't a tax increase, they're a tax cut. We've collected almost $100 billion so far in tariff revenues. And what that allows us to do, for example, with the big, beautiful bill, is to pay for that bill and pay for debt reduction. The Council of Economic Advisors, which is a quasi-independent body within the White House, just issued a study that showed that the tariffs that President Trump has put in has not led to any inflation at all. And that's consistent with our experience from the first term. So you have to distinguish between what the panicans, as President Trump calls them in the media, want to say as a tax on Trump or a tax on his policies, and what reality is. And what we've learned about tariffs, okay, initially the tariffs were put in place, Wall Street melted down. Well, guess what? Wall Street melted right back up when they realized the tariffs were good and were bringing in investment. So forget about that problem there. As far as tariff uncertainty, there's no uncertainty. President Trump is going to use tariffs to level the playing field, raise revenues for the American people. And I think the markets are realizing that and adjusting very well to that. So all is good in Trump land. All is good with the Trump trade deals. It's a long process. It's a long process for these countries to set up systems to steal from us. And we're going to get it right back. They're not going to be stealing from us anymore.
All right. Peter Navarro, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know you have a busy schedule, so I definitely appreciate it. Anything else you want to add really about any of this before I let you go?
Trust in Trump. That's it, Josh. Trust in Trump. We did it the first time, first 3 years before the virus came in from China. Were 3 of the greatest years in American economic history. And President Trump is going to do it again with lower oil prices, tax cuts, deregulation, fair trade, and an end to waste, fraud, and abuse. That's Trumpnomics in a nutshell, sir. Nice to talk to you.
All right. Great talking to you. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye-bye.